It's now my pleasure to be joined by Senator Ben Adams from District 12, which is pretty much Nampa. So, without any further introduction, Ben, what's brought you to this point where you're serving in the legislature and running for another term?
Oh man, a lot of Providence, and yeah, it's this is not. If you would have asked me 10 years ago that if you would have told me 10 years ago that I was going to be serving in the legislature of Idaho, I would not have believed you, and I probably would have laughed you out. Um, so I have grown up. I grew up kind of in a concept of service, right? Service to others. So I grew up in a missionary home and in a pastor's home, and went to college for a year to be a pastor. Realized that was not my calling, uh, and joined the Marine Corps. Went and served my country. Uh, 2 combat tours in Afghanistan. I also served on a Marine Expeditionary Unit off the coast of Africa, and uh, got out and had a lot of uh, issues stemming from that military service, and I wanted to come home. So my dad had pastored in Emmett. My sister was living and brother at the time were both living in Nampa. And so after getting out, me and my wife and our 6 month, I believe 6 month old son at the time moved from. I was being treated at the Naval Hospital in San Diego, and we got shipped up. Uh, I shipped myself up to Idaho, back home, somewhere where I had roots, where I felt like I could disappear from the limelight and raise my family in peace. And uh, as Providence would have it, uh, God did not have being invisible in my future. So 2018, I was working with veterans, specifically pushing to get us out of Afghanistan. And I had gone back to Congress and talked to these several different uh, congressional folks, one U.S. senator and one U.S. congressman, and uh, I walked away uh, extremely disillusioned with our federal government. Not that I wasn't already, but even more so because it was very apparent that they didn't really care about us. It wasn't about the service members specifically. I don't want to get into the details, but it was about politics, and it was about who's going to get the win when we get out of Afghanistan, and it was who's going to make the money. And um, that was not my priority when looking at when you wage war. I'm a just war doctrine advocate, and that didn't fit within the parameters. So I came back home and said, I'm going to go back to living my life. And my uh, veteran buddies kept poking and prodding me and asking me to run for office. And I told them no many times. And finally, I said, look, there are no open seats. So I'm not going to run. And the next day, um, former Representative Gary Collins uh, retired from the legislature. And that was kind of okay, well, I'm out of excuses. And so I ran for the legislature. Uh, I can honestly say that a lot of prayer and dedication from myself and my wife and the support group that we had helped us win that election. And so I served in the House of Representatives for 2 years. In District 13, redistricting happened, and the Senate had a lot of issues with picking up legislation that the House had passed. And when redistricting happened, there was an open seat, and I uh, ran for the Senate seat and was elected 2 years ago to my first term in the Senate. And here I am running for re-election because we have more work to do.
So you're one of the few who's actually been in both chambers now, House and Senate. What are some of the differences that you've noticed in culture and in style and in how things get done? And what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each one?
Uh, ooh, so we'll start with the House. So the House is much more volatile in in their practices, right? There's a lot more flair. Um, and in the Senate, it's a little more collegial. I think that has something to do with the numbers, right? There's 70 House members and 35 senators. And so um, it's easier to, when you have a larger block, it's easier to say, okay, I don't have to deal with those people because I can get my 36 votes somewhere else. But in the Senate, the numbers are a little tighter. Um, and so there's definitely a culture difference between the two bodies. Um, I enjoyed the House. I enjoy the Senate a lot.
Hmm. One of the major issues that well, you were part of this year and have been in the past is the Defend the Guard bill to make it so that Idaho's National Guard does not get deployed overseas unless there's actually a congressional declaration of war, which of course hasn't happened since World War II. And you carried that through the House, or excuse me, through the Senate, but then it ran into a House committee where, despite your best efforts, the committee just did not want to pass it at all. They were, swayed by arguments that it would, you'd lose federal funding, you'd lose opportunities to train. It would be, um, it would just be a bad idea all around. What do you see as you know, the obstacles to overcome to get something like that through? It's, I see it as a state sovereignty issue, as a, like you said, a just war issue. We haven't actually had a declared war in a long time, so our representatives don't deliberate on it. It's just deciding, the president deciding to go off and do something. Uh, I don't know, and just to add to that, I almost see a almost a generational difference going on, where the older generations of Republicans want to just be much more subservient, maybe not subservient. They want to defer more to military leadership and just let them do what they want to do. And obviously, they were opposed to this. So how do we overcome that?
I think information is the first one. I think it's very easy to get caught up in the narrative of this is how things have been done for the last 80 years. Um, Change is never easy, right? It doesn't matter what the issue is. Um, and the first thing you have to do is change how people look at it, right? I like to talk about the abolition of slavery in England um, with Wilberforce, and there was a huge push where they had to go back to essentially convincing the public and convincing the Parliament that slavery was immoral, that it was unjust. Um, and in the last 80 years, especially, and since the post 9/11 years, even more so, there's been a shift that war is just, it just exists and we are perpetually in it. And that is the way it is. We need to start asking ourselves, why is that? And why is it so challenging for our Congress to put their names on the line when they're putting lives on the line? Why is that? Where are the challenges there? I think once those start coming out and people in the Idaho legislature and in state legislatures around the country start understanding what the reality is on the ground, there will be even more support than there already is for this type of legislation.
I feel like there's been a lot of fractures and divides and, well, perhaps healthy debates within the Republican Party, especially over the last 10, 20 years. That's one of them. I mean, back in the Bush era, Republicans were almost entirely, if you want to support the troops, you have to support their mission, and that means don't question the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Also, with the relationship with business, Republicans were used to be very pro-business, and now there's a lot of skepticism. Maybe corporations are too big, maybe they have too much influence, and just generally over the role of government. Where do you see that going? It feels like there's is a shift in the Republican Party nationally and statewide. Uh, where's it going, and where do you fall in it?
Oh, big topic. So, let's talk about business real quick. So, I think pre-COVID, we didn't see a lot of the pushback that we see now. We saw a very monopolistic approach to how business and government were tied hip to hip, um, and we saw the detriments of that. When monopolies have shown in American history, there were times when they were beneficial. There were times when they all of a sudden became authoritarian in their positions. Right. Same things with unions. Unions had a period of time where they served a very critical purpose, um, and to some unions still do. But there's a pivot point when all of a sudden the power dynamic shifts and they have more power uh, than they should. And um, I wish I had the answer for where it's going to go within the party. I think uh, fundamentally we have to go back to um, the the principles that our country was founded on. Which, look, you should be able to be a business and grow your business and try and that's fine. Um, but individual rights reign supreme, and they should. Uh, and if a business is either with the government's blessing or without is infringing on individual rights, bodily autonomy, things like that, then the state should step in and protect those individual rights.
Obviously, you mentioned COVID, and there's that brought a lot of things up that most people hadn't thought of before. Should a private business be allowed to require that its employees wear masks or take a vaccine, take an experimental injection? Uh, and what's the role of government in stepping in there? When the governor vetoed, was it the Coronavirus Pause Act? His rationale was that, you know, as Republicans, we don't want to overregulate business, tell them what to do, or want to leave them alone. But obviously, a lot of people feel like, well, if they've gone too far, then we need to step in on behalf of the employees. And I know you were involved in that debate with some, speeches on the floor about it. With COVID over, but who knows what comes next. Um, I found a lot of people don't, a lot of voters don't want to go relitigate that. They just want to move on, pretend it never happened. But how do we create a structure so that government doesn't overstep like that again, and businesses don't, do the things they did?
We took a lot of steps to make sure that stuff wouldn't happen again, both with business closures, um, right, the Business Bill of Rights, things like that that were passed in 2022 um, in response to COVID. Right, government runs downstream of of the culture and what's happening. Um, Very rarely are we ahead of the curve. In terms of the Pause Act, I was very involved in that. I was the author and sponsor of it. Um, and it got through both chambers in 2022. And you're correct, the governor vetoed it. And in 2023, we brought it back the exact same, with the exception of now it wasn't the Pause Act, it was the Stop Act. And instead of saying, hey, we're going to do a 1 year uh, sunset where we're just going to put this into place for a year to tell everybody to stop it. And if we need to extend it, we can. And we said, no, we're just going to make this permanent. And the governor on the second go around signed the bill with no uh, letter of response. So I think he received the message from the elected bodies. If they're willing to pass a piece of legislation and make it stronger the second time around, um, and it passes with even more um, support. I mean, I think he got the message.
Shifting gears a little bit, District 12, and I've asked this of everybody. It's I look at the map over here. It's geographically very small. Just downtown Nampa, some of the surrounding areas. what are some of the unique challenges that your district faces that relate to what the legislature can do, and what are you hearing from people about what they're worried about?
Oh, so my district is primarily residential with some industrial, right down Nampa Caldwell Boulevard, along the highway, and downtown Nampa has really started to take off. We're excited for what's going to happen there. Um, but um, there are a lot of issues that the legislature has tried to tackle. We have water control issues, or I should say water purity issues. We've been working with some getting some grants for clean water projects, uh, and those are issues that, even though the city is primarily working through those, legislative assistance through DEQ has been that's been something I've been involved in. uh, Transportation, right? Nampa funds their own transportation, and with um, the transportation funding that we had, the bill that we had a couple years ago, split the funding to send funding to the cities. That was critical for Nampa, as we've seen an immense amount of growth. So the legislature can do a lot of things for the local um, population, but fundamentally, the state legislature is there to protect and stand between the citizen and an overbearing federal government, and to protect their rights that they have. And during COVID, we definitely saw that. Nampa was one of those towns that you could go to and not feel like you were in Boise, which was nice because we're not that far away. Um, and that's a reflection of the voters and the people that are in our district. Also, just a fun fact, when they redo the district lines, District 12 kind of looks like an anvil if you look at it,
It does.
which I thought was kind of cool.
So what's the hammer?
Well, I'll leave that up to the voters to decide.
So one thing I want to touch on is, you know, I have friends in conservative circles who find themselves frustrated with some of your votes. But then again, I'm looking at your scores, about 50% on the Idaho Freedom Index, but also, only 65 on IACI score. I get the sense that you really want to go your own way. You don't want to, necessarily align with any group or organization or lobbyist. Um, and presumably it's in the service of, doing your best to represent your constituents and not worry about what various other people throughout the state say. How do you decide how to vote on things? How do you decide which stance to take, especially on really complex issues? And how do you navigate that?
Yeah, okay. There are a lot of special interest groups in the state of Idaho. Um, Whether it's the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, which has a very focused special interest, or whether it's the Idaho Freedom Foundation, which also has a very specific interest, or whether it's any other group, right? If they put out a scorecard, trust me, they have a very specific interest for themselves. And my job is not to uh, go home with a good scorecard from any of those special interests. Never has been, which is why uh, um, from the actually, when I first got into the legislature, I was told you either have to be on this side or this side. If you have a good IFF score, you'll have a low IACI score, and if you have a high IACI score, you'll have a low IFF score. And I destroyed that myth. Um, and it wasn't intentional. I just read every bill that I vote on. Um, and that is something I'm very proud of. I think that's the representation that citizens deserve. We're passing laws that affect people. We should be able to have legislators that critically break down the legislation, how it's going to affect the citizens in their district, how it's going to affect the businesses in their district. Um, and I understand people can get frustrated if they're looking at a scorecard. And even if they're not looking at a scorecard, even if they're reading the bill and they interpret it differently, that's why um, I have yet to find anybody in the Idaho legislature or in the Republican Party who is 100%, I agree with every single thing, and we 100% see eye to eye. That is contrary to human nature. Um, but being able to have healthy discussions about what um, what impact bills will have, about the pros and cons. And a lot of times bills come forward and there are pros and cons, and we're asked to weigh those out. And so my methodology has not been, um, do I get to go home and let one special interest, I sleep, uh, oh, they're happy with me or they're not happy with me. Fundamentally, I represent the district that I live in. And at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to go to sleep at night and live with the decision that I made on behalf of my voters. And that's how I've approached every vote that I've taken in the legislature.
That's I've really appreciated the opportunity to talk with you and the other candidates, especially those who have been in office, because it's one thing to look at scores or look at mailers or look at headlines. It's another to actually have a conversation and say, oh, why do you vote the way you do? What are your core principles? What's your worldview? It's like the difference between the map and the terrain.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
switching
Good
oh,
analogy.
go on.
No, it was a good analogy.
Switching over to spending. That's obviously a huge issue because that's really the one you know mandated duty of the legislature is to spend our money to have a balanced budget. And you are on the JFAC, so you help determine those budgets. Uh, what's the process like there? How are you trying to uh, strike a balance between funding what needs to be funded or what people expect to be funded, but also trying to trim it down, pull back government a little bit from as expansive as it's gotten?
Yeah. The legislature has a fiduciary responsibility first to the taxpayer. And um, there is always a lot of discussion about federal dollars, and I'll probably end up touching on that. Um, for folks that are new to Idaho, especially, the federal government controls 40% or more of our state land, and we don't get paid enough for that. Um, there's a lot of federal dollars that we have to take, and we should take, um, because they're renting our land, right? Um, or they're using our facilities, or they're doing things like that. And there are lots of programs that the federal government passes. I still remember back in 2021 when the first wave of uh, what was it called?
Uh,
ARP, the American Relief, whatever. It was the first. It was the first Biden money dump to the states. Yeah, I know. I can't remember the. And I know you're trying to think of it too. Um, and I still remember sitting there so frustrated that we were blowing the ceiling off of our federal spending, that it was going absolutely bonkers. And I wasn't alone. There were a lot of us legislators. This is before I was on JFAC. There were a lot of us legislators who were sitting there, and we all received a letter from our congressional delegation saying, "Look, I know you don't want the money, but it's already been spent, and there's no piggy bank for it to go back to. So we encourage you to take the money and spend it in a way that benefits Idaho and strengthens Idaho going forward. Don't use it on frivolous projects. Use it, invest it in Idaho, because if we don't invest it in Idaho, it'll be invested in another state." And that was a hard pill for me to swallow, and still is, to be honest with you. Um, moving back to JFAC, Canyon County and Nampa specifically went from having no rep or went from having both chairs of JFAC as residents of Nampa, and a lot of influence on the Joint Finance Committee to having no one. And So when it came around and it was my turn to look at open committees, I looked at JFAC, and even though I'm not an accountant in my regular life, I said my county and my district needs representation on that committee. And so I went in on that committee, um, ready to learn. I've learned a lot in that committee. There are 10 senators and 10 representatives in that committee, and we work on budgets and we negotiate what we should and shouldn't keep in budgets, and we bring them out, um, and we vote on them, we debate on them, and a lot of the uh, work that gets done on what should and shouldn't be in that budget proposal when it comes before the JFAC committee has already been whittled out. So there's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. Um, and one of the reasons that there was a change in the process in JFAC was uh, intentionally to try and make more of that transparent. And I think we got to see that uh, this last session, especially.
Well, I noticed the Senate, it had been a long time. I don't remember the exact number of years since the Senate itself on the floor had sent a budget bill back to JFAC, and this year it happened several times. And I would guess that comes from the ability to be more discerning about the additional line items once you know that you've already passed the maintenance budget.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's this concept that, oh man, we should just, once a budget hits the floor, man, we should just pass the budget because that's our constitutional obligation. We're the fiduciary overseers of the taxpayers' money. And you should look at those budgets and see what's actually in those budgets. Um, and there were many times where budgets were cut, right? But you wouldn't know it by some of the special interest groups because they would come out and say, oh, we don't support that budget for this or that or the other, even though it was cut by 8%
Hmm.
or, from the previous year. So, and another thing that's been challenging is some budgets did grow. And that's because our state is growing. And we had a lot of growth in important areas, right? We had the quagga mussel incidents where, that is absolutely the long-term damage that would be had if we don't squash that out. And I'm a little concerned that we haven't. It'll be interesting to find out if we actually got them all, because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars a year in damages, right, from pipes and loss of fish, all sorts of things. If that, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a pest. If it sticks around, so uh, that is a place where the state needs to step in, and we're protecting, the water. In that case, we're protecting the people's access to water. Um, so yeah, it's a mixed bag. There's a lot of budgets, right? There's 100 budgets or so, and no one's going to be happy with every single one. I wasn't happy with every single one.
Um, I remember talking a couple of years ago with a candidate who's not on JFAC, but he was talking about the transportation issue and how, in many cases, you can either spend more money now to have a better system in the future, or you can spend less now and then you have to spend even more in the future because now you've got, worse problems when you don't anticipate growth or something. And it's sometimes a hard sell because you're trying to say, well, we're going to spend more money than we might otherwise now, but it's an investment. Unfortunately, I think the word investment has become overused in government. Everything's an investment now. Um, so that's one of those where if you're just an absolute budget hawk, you're going to say just no. But I would guess there are things that are worth spending on. It's just a question of how do you decide which ones are those?
Yeah, and my district is right in the Beltway, right? We're in the population center of Idaho. And so transportation is a huge issue, and transportation funding and planning ahead as we see the growth coming. We can all dig our heels in and pretend like it's not going to happen. Um, but it's a lot harder, and this is kind of the concept, right? I'd rather pay for a highway or pay for some transportation funding now than have to use eminent domain 10 years from now because oh well, now it's grown out and we weren't prepared for how it was going to grow, and so we're gonna have to eat that.
Hmm. Speaking of transportation, that brings up a question I had about specifically about JFAC. Right at the end of the year, there was this battle over the sale of the ITD building in Boise, and it was a standoff until the end. They ended up defeating the budget that, or they ended up putting forth the budget that unwound the sale. And I believe you spoke out against it in JFAC uh, because, correct me if I'm wrong, that you felt that it was JFAC deciding policy rather than just handling the budgets. Where's the line when it comes to policy versus spending?
So JFAC has historically, it appears to me, and I'm just going to say this, it appears to me that it is whenever they want to. Um, but my approach has always been that legislative intent or legislative language that's attached to a budget should always advance the legislative intent of the legislation that funding is going to support. So, okay, we want, we're going to fund this, and the legislative intent of the legislation is for it to go to this, but the agency, might be spending it somewhere else. So we're going to put in that budget that no, you're going to spend it just like this, and it advances the intent. And in this case, and I don't want to speak too much on it because it is in the courts, and I want them to, let their I've already said my piece pretty strongly, but my approach to budgets and putting language in the budgets is um, if you're going to do policy in budgets, fine, just admit you're doing policy in budgets. And if you're not, then don't. Um, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. And previously in the session, I had been told very clearly, well, we don't do policy. This is a budget committee, not a policy committee, as it related to the launch program.
Hmm.
Because I wanted to put parameters on that because it did not fulfill the legislative intent, right? There was a giant hole in that budget. And it ended up, obviously, the votes were there to get it out of JFAC multiple times for the transportation budget. A lot of the concerns with that are just how it was handled, right? And that's something that the courts will decide. I do think there was some bad faith acting on the part of the legislature, and I don't think that should stand. But we'll let the courts decide.
Yeah, just as an outside observer, it was interesting to watch. A lot of twists and turns to the story. Uh,
It was interesting to be part of too. So.
Kind of tangentially related to spending because it's a lot of money. The biggest chunk of our budget is Medicaid. Just the whole idea of entitlements and welfare. Uh, we can talk about you know winding those down and returning government just to protecting life, liberty, and property, like the founders intended. Uh, but the truth is, the government is involved in a lot of things, and once it gets involved, then people come to rely on it, based for employment or contracting, or just for straight out entitlements. When Representative Redmond presented a bill to put sideboards on Medicaid expansion, a bunch of people signed up to testify saying, no, you can't touch it because you'll ruin me. I rely on this. I'll die. So I see two issues. One, you don't want people to die. The point is to take care of people, us hopefully by giving them the ability to take care of themselves. But then politically, if you went forward with something that can be spun in the media as you're going to make people die, then you probably don't have a long political career and you're not going to be able to accomplish the cuts in government that you hope. So how do we move forward? How do we rein in spending, entitlements, get people back on their feet to take care of themselves without just cutting them off?
Yeah, one of the things I hear a lot is, well, if we cut this program, then the private sector will pick it up, right? Uh, and that is great in theory. Uh, but what is actually happening is that the private sector, for the most part, is cashing in. Right, they're beneficiaries
Hmm.
of tax dollars when they're dialed into this. So this concept, it's a cash cow for them, and so the private sector is not prepared to. In fact, a lot of the private sector wants to keep it, and that's tough. That is a challenge that I think we're going to have to face at some point. Um, yeah, it is a very tricky subject with Medicaid because this last session, actually the last 2 years when the Medicaid budget has come up, I've stood up as a missionary kid who grew up in the former Soviet Union. Um, I stood up and said, "Hey guys, congratulations to everyone who wanted socialized medicine. You have it. This is what it costs, and it's rising at an unsustainable rate, and it will collapse, and we have to address it." Um, but as you mentioned, we do have to pass budgets. It's a constitutionally required bit, and as it goes through that vetting process, um, we try to cut what we can. But our Medicaid is a weird setup where we talk about how we have a balanced budget amendment and we have to be balanced. We have to have our balanced budget, but Medicaid is the one exception because we put money aside and they tell us how much money we owe next year,
Hmm.
and then we either shot high or we shot low. And so it always encourages us to shoot a little high. So we come as a fiscally conservative state, if you're or a fiscally conservative voter, if you're sitting here at your kitchen table and you don't know if this bill is going to be $150 or $200, you don't put back $150 and hope it's not $200. And that's kind of the wall we keep running into with this Medicaid. Um, but we're running out of time to figure out how we're gonna actually uh, handle it. And so I know there's a lot of other minds that are working on it as well. But this is something that it doesn't take a day to solve, right? Everybody can throw out a solution in a day, but to actually work through the kinks and make sure that this is going to be effective as a solution is a different story, and we've been working on that. Um, I'm really tired of voting for subcommittees to study this and that and the other. But this is one of those issues that we actually did need to study because it is a huge portion of our budget.
Hmm. You're mentioning, comparing it with, growing up in the Soviet, former Soviet Union. It reminded me when the Senate heard the budget bill that included the summer EBT program for the Division of Welfare, uh, and I just looked it up to remind myself. You started voting. You started the vote by explaining that it was essentially Soviet ration cards, and I felt just watching the vote that set the tone for the rest of the votes, and it ended up being defeated and was stripped out. And so it just brings up an interesting idea. Are you consciously aware of how the fact that you are the first one to vote gives you the opportunity to set the stage for things?
I wish it set the stage every time, Brian. Um, I do recognize that, especially if I have something that to add in my 60 seconds, which was what I did in that instance. When I first got into the Senate votes different than the House. The House has a board where they push their button on their phone and it either goes red or green. And in the Senate, it's by voice vote, alphabetical order. And Adams is really, really early in that. In our case, it's the first one. And when I first got to the Senate, a senator came up to me and said, "Adams, you're the only true vote in the Senate. Everybody else is counting." And I haven't taken that for granted though. I recognize that there are times when it can set the tone. Um, but it's about the issues, and it's about it was very clear from the debate of that bill. Um, and I don't think mine was the hard pushing point, my 60-second debate. I think it was the cherry on top that kind of, because the cream had already been laid by a lot of folks.
Hmm.
So
That's one of those little differences between the House and the Senate that sometimes can, you know, turn out to have repercussions.
we tried. It was interesting because when I was in the House, that was always a frustrating piece. Was we can't hear how they're voting, so we couldn't count their votes. Then we had to wait for the list to come out at the very end, and we wanted to know who was voting how.
Hmm.
And so our first year my first year in the Senate, the Senate Pro Tem Senator Winders, Pro Tem Senator Winder said, uh, "If you'd like, you can turn your mic on when you vote, so people can hear how you vote." I think that was a mistake because it just turned into how emphatic do you like it or don't like it, instead of getting through the business. And this year we didn't really see that as much.
Hmm. I did find it helpful to be actually in the Senate gallery for important votes, so I could actually hear who's voting how. Because when you're watching on the stream, it's often hard to tell.
Yes, it is.
One more issue I wanted to cover. I know we're nearing the end here. School choice. That's something that's been a big debate, and I've talked to a lot of other people about it. Just and there's a very wide range of opinions on this. Obviously, we have school choice in that parents can send their children wherever. The question is, should tax money follow those children? I remember you at the end of the session last year introduced a tax credit bill, and then there was an expanded tax credit bill this year, but it didn't get out of the House committee. So I guess my question is, what do you want to see in that arena, and how do you get that through both chambers?
Yeah. Oh, so I'm a homeschool graduate of Idaho. So I come from a very pro school choice position. I have a fourth grader who is homeschooled as well in my house. Um, and we understand the benefits of not having the state anywhere near our children's education. But that's our choice, right? And that's a challenge. One of the challenges we've had though is not we want and as the state of Idaho has pushed towards school choice options, and it have even the expansion of the charter schools. People don't remember this. Charter schools are seen as poster childs for improving education quality in the state of Idaho, right? Um, People are on waiting lists to get their kids into charter schools. But when charter schools first started coming into the state, there was a ton of pushback against them because, oh, they're going to take away from public schools. And that didn't happen. Um, and I think this is another one of those scenarios where we're looking at um, a lot of different options on how to let parents have more decision making power in what education their kids get. Um, and I obviously am a supporter of the tax credit option. You wouldn't say no to a grocery tax credit. You wouldn't say no to all sorts of tax credits, to a gas tax credit. Why would you say no to an education tax credit? Unless you're protecting the system. And I think that's the discussion that'll have to be had in the legislature. But I tend to lean towards those kind of programs where it's not creating more conflict than it needs to, but it's also diversifying and empowering parents really to just make their own decisions on their kids' education. And I think that conversation is ongoing. I think that conversation is far from over. I think the tax credit bill, I was a supporter of the tax credit bill that came out this year. I thought it was a really good angle, and I appreciated Senator Den Hartog for bringing that. Um, and we'll see more of that because we're not done.
Are there any other issues that you want to cover while are here? And do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I can talk for a long time, so I'm gonna thank you first, Brian, for having me on for doing this, and I appreciate your approach on these interviews. I encourage other folks in the legislature. It's very hesitant that are very hesitant to go on because they never know what kind of questions they're going to get. They never know what the approach is going to be. I've appreciated your approach. Um, I can tell you want to bring information to the voter, not just make plugs here or there, and that's much appreciated. Um, I guess my kind of farewell and for this interview is, I've really appreciated the opportunity to serve the citizens that I represent. Um, we're always going to have disagreements. That's, I mean, it is in the nature of politics. Um, we need to remember who we are as a people, um, especially when the noise gets really loud. We are on the same team. We can have philosophical disagreements. Um, we can vote different on bills, um, but we're Americans, we're Idahoans, and there is some unity that needs to be brought back. Um, it's the reason why Idaho has been a solid red Republican state for a long time, because uh, we can disagree and ferociously, and shake hands at the end and say, "Okay, let's be together on the next one." And I think that's what the voters are ready to see from their representation. Um, that's not to say there aren't fights that are worth hills that are worth dying on. There certainly are, but um, I've appreciated representing my district. It's been an absolute honor, and I look forward to getting back to work for them in the upcoming session.
Ben Adams, State Senator from District 12. Thank you.